Today's movie comes courtesy of Sam Kassan, who has requested the Bobbin's Choice option. As such, I have chosen the film adaptation of Coraline, a movie that came out in 2009 based on a book published in 2002. So it is kind of my fault that Coraline comes right after Spirited Away, but in my defense, I ordered the requests weeks before I recorded the videos. Regardless, let's get things moving. The story about the story. Ah yes, Neil Gaiman, among the greatest living fantasy authors in the world. There's a lot I could say about him, but I won't. This segment is about the movie, and besides that, there's a Gaiman book on the request list, and I can talk about it then. Until then, I can at least discuss where the original book came from. Coraline is a novella, a short novel, that first got its name when Gaiman misspelled Caroline and realized there was probably a couple of parents out there crazy enough to name their poor kid Coraline. The title then became a dark fantasy story because that's what Neil Gaiman writes, and it quickly won several awards, including a Hugo and a Nebula. It then, not so quickly, got adapted into a movie. See, there's this other guy, goes by the name Henry Selick. While you might not recognize the name, you've doubtlessly encountered his work. Selick started his career the same way Miyazaki did, drawing the in-between frames for a big animation studio, in this case Disney. Instead of working his way up through the ranks, however, Selick struck out on his own as a freelancer, and he directed commercials and helped storyboard the cult film Return to Oz. He also met a few famous names, most importantly, Tim Burton. Tim Burton once wrote a poem titled The Nightmare Before Christmas back when he also worked at Disney, and while he always intended to adapt it, he wouldn't get the idea for a stop-motion production until after he left Disney to make Beetlejuice and Batman. In fact, Disney still owned the adaptation rights. Now they did give the go-ahead thanks to Burton's successes, and Burton brought Henry Selick on to direct the project since he was busy with live-action movies. The final product was as much Selick's as it was Burton's, and Selick got so much experience with stop-motion animation that he would go on to make several other stop-motion films. The first was James and the Giant Peach, an adaptation of a famous Roald Dahl book, and the second was the hybrid Monkey Bone, an adaptation of an underground comic that was, objectively, a terrible movie. In 2002, Neil Gaiman was still writing Coraline. He and Selick discussed adapting the book, since Gaiman was a big fan of Nightmare Before Christmas. Pre-production lasted a few years. Among other things, Selick had to expand the original novella to reach a feature length, and so the movie contains scenes and characters that aren't in the book. He also brought on the Japanese illustrator Tadahiro Uesugi as the concept artist, since he wanted a style that did not follow any Hollywood trends. The filming took place in a giant warehouse in Oregon. They divided the warehouse into different sets and stages, filming a dozen scenes simultaneously to speed things up. After all, stop motion demands that you reset a shot 24 times for every second of footage, so time is a treasured asset during productions. They also saved on expenses by using early 3D printers, and they made the film 3D since all they had to do was move the camera slightly and take 2 pictures for each frame. The 3D is still just a gimmick, but it's kind of funny that of all the animation styles, stop motion has the easiest time cheating to get a 3D effect. When it finally came out in 2009, Coraline was a fairly big success, especially for being an independent production. The budget came in at $60 million, and the worldwide box office returns got them $125 million. Incidentally, while Selick would move on to other companies, the production company Laika would continue to make stop-motion films, including Paranorman, The Box Trolls, and Kubo and the Two Strings. But I'm not discussing them today. I'm discussing the story. We meet our protagonist, Coraline, as she and her family move into a large, isolated house that's being rented out as the Pink Palace Apartments. We catch glimpses of the other residents, but the action begins as Coraline heads out the back door, strips a forked branch, and wanders through an abandoned garden and the dry woods behind them, dowsing for water. When she disturbs a cat, she runs further until she's standing on a ring of mushrooms. This is when some crazy person with an evil-looking outfit races down at Coraline on his bike. He's much less intimidating once he takes off his mask, though, and he explains that the well Coraline was looking for is in the middle of the mushrooms. This is YB, the grandson of the Pink Palace's landlady, and he mentions that she normally doesn't rent to families with kids, not even adolescents. Coraline is not very fond of YB. The next day, we see Coraline with her mother, who seemed to have very little time or patience to spare for her daughter. Coraline also gets a doll of herself, apparently a gift from YB, who found it in his grandma's stuff. Coraline then visits her dad, who has even less time for her, but encourages her to explore the 150-year-old house. She does so, and she catalogs all of the leaks, creaks, bugs, and muddy shower water. When Coraline gets to a sitting room and starts setting up some snow globes, her doll seems to move across the room next to a small door that's been papered over. She gets her mom to open the door with an old key in the key drawer, but the other side is nothing but bricks. After a disappointing dinner to end her disappointing day, something interesting happens. Coraline spots a kangaroo rat under her bed and chases it to the tiny door, and this time there's a long glowing tunnel on the other side. She crosses through and ends up back in the sitting room, but there are a few differences. Her mom is cooking instead of her dad, and she's making something tasty, and her dad is making music about her instead of writing gardening catalogs. Music composed and sung by John Linnell of They Might Be Giants, no less. Oh, and both of their eyes have been replaced by buttons. It's weird and clearly magical, but it's also wish fulfillment that Coraline can't help but enjoy her time with Other Mother and Other Father. Coraline falls asleep in the other house, but she wakes up back in her own world. It's clearly not a dream, though, because the poison oak rash Other Mother treated is gone. When Coraline leaves the house, she finds a bunch of smelly packages for a Babinski. Babinski is the upstairs neighbor, a rather disturbing Russian guy who does some acrobatic stretches outside, and is very jealous of the jumping mouse circus he supposedly keeps inside his room. The smelly packages are cheeses to motivate the mice, and he gives Coraline a raw beet before going inside. However, as Coraline leaves, he tells her that the mice wanted to give her a warning. Don't go through the little door. Coraline then heads downstairs to speak with the two retired English actresses who live in the basement with their dogs, and all of their former dogs, whom they stuff when they die. One of them then reads her tea leaves, and they see a creepy crawling hand in them, or giraffe. When Coraline heads back outside, she finds YB and the cat looking for banana slugs in the foot-deep fog. He mentions that the doll must be as old as the house, despite looking just like Coraline, and he explains that his grandma's twin sister disappeared when they lived in the house, and that's why she doesn't let kids live there. That evening, Coraline leaves some cheese out for the mouse, and it doesn't disappoint. She heads through the portal, and this time she explores the rest of the house. The other garden is full of strange, glowing plants. The other YB can't speak, and therefore annoy Coraline, and Babinski's Mouse Circus is a grand production. The next day, Coraline is with her mother shopping for a gray school uniform, and when she finds a pair of colorful gloves, she asks to buy them. Her mother refuses, and they get into an argument on the way home. Coraline also noticed that she locked the small door, so when her mom leaves to buy groceries, her daughter finds the key, opens the door, and this time the glowing tunnel is there in the middle of the day. Coraline finds a fresh outfit and delicious food waiting for her, along with an invitation to downstairs. On her way out, she spots the cat, and it's the only thing around to have real eyes instead of buttons. Oh, and he can talk now. And he has Keith David's voice. He explains that he can come and go from this world as he pleases, despite how she hates cats. The cat warns Coraline that this world is dangerous, and the other YB told him so, but he has to flee before he can finish. Coraline then goes downstairs and watches the actresses put on a performance and transform into their younger selves. The other parents bring Coraline back inside her apartment, and Other Mother says that she can stay in this world forever if she would only replace her eyes with buttons. However, Coraline absolutely refuses, and she races up to her room so she can go to sleep and get out of what is now a very creepy dimension. She falls asleep, but this time when she wakes up, she's stuck. Coraline goes downstairs and confronts Other Father, but when he says too much, the hands in his piano force him to stop. She then runs outside and meets up with the cat as she tries to leave, but beyond the garden, there's nothing but an empty white void. She keeps going anyway, but Coraline eventually wraps around back to the house. The cat then grabs one of the circus mice, and when he kills it, it turns into a dead rat stuffed with sawdust. Coraline grabs a walking stick and forces her way into the sitting room, but Other Mother is there waiting for her, along with a bunch of insectoid furniture. Coraline once again refuses to put on the buttons, so Other Mother transforms into a tall, lanky woman and throws Coraline through a mirror and into a dungeon cell. As it turns out, Coraline is not alone. There are 3 ghosts hiding on the bed, 3 young kids with buttons for eyes. These are the victims of the Other Mother, and they call her the Beldam. She spied on them with dolls, lured each of them to her world, and tempted them with fake wonders. But when they accepted the button eyes, she ate them up. They don't have any help to give, but they ask Coraline to find their eyes so that they can be free. At this point, Other Wybie pulls Coraline out of the cell. He may be the Beldam's creation, but he's rebelling against her and helping Coraline escape. She gets back to the real world, but her parents aren't around. Real Wybie comes to the door asking for the doll back, and then Coraline realizes that his grand-aunt was one of the missing children. She tells him everything, but he thinks she's crazy and runs for it. She then visits the downstairs neighbors to ask them about her missing parents, and they give her a jade amulet that's good for bad things, or lost things, depending on which one you ask. That evening, the cat appears and leads Coraline to her parents, and it turns out they're trapped behind a mirror someplace cold. If the Beldam can't use honey, she'll use vinegar. Coraline prepares herself to get her parents back, and as she crawls into the tunnel, the cat starts speaking again. He suggests challenging the Beldam. Now she's not bound by honor, but she loves games. Sure enough, she's waiting for Coraline on the other side, and she locks the door and swallows the key. They go to the kitchen, and Coraline suggests a wager. If she can find her real parents and the eyes of the dead children, the Beldam must let everyone go. If she loses, Coraline will sew on the buttons. The Beldam gives her one hint. Each of the 3 wonders she made has a ghost eye hiding in plain sight. The first wonder is the garden. When dragonflies try to steal her amulet, she realizes that she can use it to find the eyes. The eye is hidden on Other Father's praying mantis machine, and as soon as she grabs it, the garden turns gray and lifeless. The second wonder is in the downstairs theater, the pearl used in the show, and when the actresses refuse to let go, Coraline gets terrier bats to attack them. The third wonder is the circus, the ball used by the ringmaster mouse. The ringleader rat gets away with the ball, but luckily the cat catches it. The last thing that Coraline needs to find is her parents, but the world is falling apart. On top of that, she knows the Beldam won't honor their deal, and so when she returns to the sitting room, she says her parents are behind the small door so that the Beldam will open it. And they're actually in a snow globe, it turns out. So, Coraline throws the cat at the now spider-like Beldam and grabs it. Coraline falls into a metallic spider web, but escapes, and she breaks off the Beldam's metallic hand in the process. Coraline's parents are back, unaware of their captivity, and even of the slush in their hair. Still, the catalog they've been working on is done, and now they have time for their daughter, and for a garden party to celebrate their new life. They even got her those gloves she wanted. But this story isn't over yet. When Coraline goes to sleep, the three ghosts appear in a dream to thank her and to warn her that the beldam will still try to get the key. Coraline gets an idea of where to hide it, but as she and the cat leave, that metal hand claws its way out of the tunnel. Coraline goes to the well to toss the key inside, but the hand grabs it first and starts dragging her back to the house. That's when YB shows up and rides in to the rescue. He almost falls into the well, but in the end, they smash the hand and throw both it and the key down the well. YB then explains that he changed his mind after his grandma showed him an old photo. The movie then ends with the garden party. The analysis. Coraline may have the same premise as Spirited Away, and they both borrow heavily from dark fairy tales, but the movies don't have the same plot structure. Coraline doesn't need to grow up the way Chihiro does. She can already basically handle herself. She just needs to appreciate what she has. Now, don't take that message the wrong way. Coraline acts annoyed and disgusted by everything, but she's not completely off base. Her parents are neglecting her. Her new neighbors are all weirdos. The only kid her age is a creep. The school uniforms are gray and ugly. Her father's cooking is terrible. And the garden is an empty, muddy mess. But here's the thing. While all of these things are problems, none of them are as bad as Coraline makes them out to be. Her parents are neglecting her and they don't have any patience, but that's because they're up against a deadline, and normally they do have time for their daughter. Her neighbors are weirdos, but after the introductions, they're actually fairly nice people. YB has his faults, but he and Coraline have some common interests, and ultimately, he's a friend you can count on. The school uniforms are ugly, but, no, that's about it. Still, her father's cooking is only terrible because they haven't gone grocery shopping, and the garden looks amazing once her parents put some effort into it. Sure, none of it's perfect, but, well, life is pain. Anyone who says differently is selling something, and that is definitely the case here. I believe it's this perspective that saves Coraline from the beldam's temptations. Her life isn't really that bad, and she knows it. She's just going through a stressful move, and it's got her seeing the worst side of everything. Coraline is old enough to have some perspective, to have gone through some bad times, and to know that things will get better. She's several years older than any of the beldam's other victims. And between her perspective and the fact that she's old enough to not automatically trust adults, she's able to emphatically turn down the beldam's offer. So, really, I guess you could say that Coraline doesn't have to grow up in this movie, but she has to prove that she already has. I mean, people don't often talk about the downside of having a childlike imagination, but that downside is pretty important. Children are credulous. They're gullible. An active imagination and a limited experience with reality mean that children are much more likely to believe things that aren't true. They're much more likely to try things that will never work, even if it's dangerous. And while there's something admirable about that, it also makes it easy for someone to take advantage of you, to feed your imagination, your desire to be special, and your hope that you can live a life without pain. The beldam is a con artist who promises everything to get what she wants. And while it worked on the younger kids, Coraline proved that she's too old for fairy tales. Thanks for joining me again for today's film review, and I hope I'll see you next time when I cover a book about a member of the Enigma Rouge.